Hello, everyone. I'm Megan Sullivan, and welcome to another episode of History in Games, an educational podcast where we celebrate the educational power of video games by talking about the real history and stories hidden inside our favorite games. Just a quick shout out if you haven't already seen or heard the episode, I recently interviewed historian and author Barry Strauss, and we talked about real historical figures in ancient Greece and Rome, as well as mythological figures, and how being a total jerk in the ancient world could win you godhood. It's a really fascinating subject. I hope you guys will give it a listen and a watch. And if you like what you see, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe button, and it really helps history and games to grow. And I know that I've covered a lot of ancient Greek and Roman history lately. There is a reason for that I'm excited to share, but not quite yet. So thank you for your patience in advance. However, today I'm going to pivot completely and talk about a subject I haven't talked about before on History and Games. I'm really excited about this one. It's all about the Haitian Revolution in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. It's a topic that a lot of people don't know very much about. It's not well covered in media like TV, films, video games. Although if you're like me and you're an Assassin's Creed fan, you probably played Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, which is a really good DLC bit of content for Assassin's Creed. You can actually play the game by itself as well. And we're going to talk about that and its portrayal of the Haitian Revolution. But such a fascinating topic, and I know very little about it. So I brought in an expert. And so I'd like to welcome to the show Dr. Alyssa Sepinwall. Thank you so much for being here. How are you today?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me today, Meg.
I'm really excited to talk about your book, Slave Revolt on Screen, the Haitian Revolution in Film and Video Games, because I love how it taps into the idea of the Haitian Revolution being a super fascinating and important topic, but it's just not discussed in film and TV shows, and only a little bit in the video game world. But before we sort of dive into that, I wanted to give the audience a chance to know you, who you are, what you do, and what got you so interested in the history of Haiti.
Sure. Well, I'm a professor in California. I live in San Diego. I'm a professor of history at Cal State San Marcos. I did my PhD at Stanford University. And when I was going to school as an undergrad and then in grad school, Haiti was not part of the curriculum. I studied French history, and let's just say that it was like #history so white. There was not a lot of discussion of slavery. And even when I got to Stanford in 1992, a lot of people in French history were not talking about the fact that France had gained a lot of its wealth in the 18th century from slavery. In the United States, of course, we know that slavery was part of our history because it was on the territory of the continental United States in the South. But in France, the sugar and coffee colonies that were making huge profits for French merchants were far away in the Caribbean. And so it was something that a lot of even French historians didn't talk about. 1989 was the bicentennial of the French Revolution, and there was almost not a damn thing said at all about the fact that the French were proclaiming all men are born free and equal, and slavery continued. So this is something that I started to look at in graduate school while I researched the French Revolution. And I was particularly interested in how the French treated minoritized groups. After they said in the Declaration of the Rights of Man, all men are born and remain free and equal. Well, how did they treat Jews who were not fully equal citizens or Protestants? How were women treated? And then how were enslaved people and free Blacks treated? So that led me to Haiti, and I've continued to work on the subject more and more. And even though I still work on France, it's actually more motivating to work on Haiti because there's less known and written about it. And I know that I'm filling a need when I'm writing about it and explaining its history to people.
Yeah, I do think that's important. And it just, the more I dove into it, the more fascinating a topic it is. So before we actually talk about the revolution itself, can you paint us a picture of how this all got started, the way that the island of Haiti was divided up between colonial powers, why they started importing slaves, and the appalling conditions that these slaves were under?
Yeah, so European countries, when they discovered that the Americas were there, there was just an incredible greedy appetite, I don't know what else to call it, for gold, but then also for the products that could be grown there. And when Europeans went to the Americas, they, starting from Christopher Columbus, started to kidnap and try to force into labor indigenous people. Unfortunately, especially for the indigenous people, the Europeans were also exposing indigenous people to germs that they hadn't encountered before. So if you think about the same way that COVID was incredibly destructive in its first wave before anyone was vaccinated or had any exposure to it, the Europeans brought smallpox, and it decimated Native people. But still the Europeans were very greedy and they wanted to grow sugar and coffee. So eventually they decided to try to kidnap and enslave people from West Africa and bring them to the New World. And the conditions there were backbreaking. I hear sometimes people say they had to enslave people to grow these things, and it's ridiculous. It's like, okay, I have to get elementary schools hooked on drugs if I want to make money. Like, what does that even mean? You didn't have to be growing sugar and coffee. But yes, it was backbreaking labor. And in order to kind of traumatize people into submission so that they would think there was no hope of having a revolt, the punishments for people who would try to resist were horrifying. And enslavers would also make other enslaved people watch to try to give them a message that they should comply. So it was really a terrible system. And it's out of these conditions that eventually you're going to have the Haitian Revolution, which was a revolt by the enslaved people in Haiti, begin.
So obviously things changed. Like, obviously there were appalling conditions for a long time for these slaves. And I can't imagine that they didn't try to run away or try to get freedom. But of course, as you said, that people were made an example of, and the conditions and the torture and the results of trying to run away were so appalling. In fact, we'll talk a little bit more about this game later, but there's a game from the 1980s called Freedom, Rebels in the Darkness. And it's all about trying to win your freedom by basically burning down the plantation and escaping your masters. But it's pretty horrifying if you get caught in the game. It says something about your arms and legs being slashed and hot lead being poured into the wounds. Was that a real thing? Or
those are all real things. Yeah, Freedom, Rebels in the Darkness, we can talk about more later if you want. But this was created, a game by descendants of enslaved people, by Muriel Tramy and Patrick Chamoiseau in Martinique. And they were absolutely going by things from the slave code and the court cases that were done to enslaved people who tried to resist.
Right. So it was deliberately inhumane to send a message. And yet in the late 18th century, something obviously changed starting in the 1790s. What was that change? Was it the American Revolution, the French Revolution, or was this always this was just inevitable that, the slave population, I think I read that it was somewhere between 400 and 500,000 against maybe 50,000 white slave owners. Like, something was going to give. What was the catalyst?
It's a super question, right? And it's something that, as a historian in my classes, we always think about, was this inevitable or was it contingent? Is it something that had to happen? And so I want to say first that enslaved people had always tried to resist. Even if they couldn't get arms, they could do things like trying to run away. And again, if they were caught, then the punishments were horrifying. But people were able to run away. And one of the things that Haiti had, compared to some other territories where there was slavery, were mountains everywhere. And so it would be hard. I mean, enslavers would try, and they would send packs of dogs against people. But there were always maroon communities, which is one of the things when we get to Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, when Adewale comes to Saint-Domingue, colonial Haiti, connects up with the existing population of Maroons. The thing about, we call it marinage or maroonage, running away, is it still was a kind of individual thing that was about fleeing from the system rather than trying to overthrow it, because trying to overthrow it was just too beyond the realm of possibility when you consider that enslaved people were exhausted, that there were laws to prevent them from trying to talk to each other, to plan revolts. People tried to do it anyway and were involved in poisonings or other kinds of things. But as far as planning full-scale revolt and having arms to do it, this was something out of the realm of the possibility. All right, so what changed?
Right.
Good question, Meg. In this way, I think the French Revolution really facilitated the conditions. And in textbooks, it'll often say the French Revolution happened in 1789. The slaves heard about it and decided that they wanted freedom too. And so they revolted in 1791. Now that is way too simplistic. It's not that suddenly the Declaration of the Rights of Man and white Frenchmen's Enlightenment ideas suddenly reached them and they said, I didn't think I wanted to be free before, but now it sounds like a good idea. I'll try to get it. It's not that. But what happens after 1789, because Haiti is a French colony, and you have the same conflicts there. I mean, it wasn't called Haiti before then. It was called Saint-Domingue. Although Haitians often, when they're looking at the history under French colonization, still use the country's current name. Choosing to use an indigenous name for the island, Haiti, instead of the name that the French imposed. I hope that was a helpful detail. Sometimes like
I find it fascinating. The more details, right, the better.
Right. What was I? Okay. So yes, 1789, whites in Haiti were divided amongst themselves. Did they support the revolution? Did they support the king? And you start to have fighting breaking out in Saint-Domingue between whites, just like you have in metropolitan France. And then you have the free people of color who weren't enslaved, but they were free. And some of them, they're trying to get equal rights, right? If the French are saying in the metropole, all men are born and remain free and equal, they say, why then do we have discriminatory racial laws? Because just like Jim Crow in the South, even when free Blacks, free people of mixed race, weren't enslaved, there were still humiliating laws about, that they couldn't pass a white person on the sidewalk. They couldn't eat with them, that there was supposed to be separation. So they were trying to get rid of that. And then you had racist whites who were trying to stop them from getting any equality. And in the meantime, in the mix of all of this fighting between different factions of whites in Haiti and free people of color, you had some enslaved people in the north of Haiti who said, this is a very good time to try to launch a struggle for freedom. And so the other thing to keep in mind is that often, especially even when people say slaves, it's like a noun, it's like a condition that they have, they've always been slaves. And I've learned from people, Gabrielle Foreman, we can link to that, has a really wonderful crowdsourced document getting us to try to think about the language that we use when we talk about slavery. And even just the term enslaved person, it's a person who someone did this to, and now they're enslaved. It's the condition. So when we remember that enslaved people had a life before slavery, if they were born in Africa, how is it that people had been enslaved? It was often people who were prisoners of war in conflicts between different groups in Africa. And when Europeans came and said, with guns, and said, either we're going to enslave you and use these guns against you, or you can turn over some other people to us, and then they'll be gone. It was generally prisoners of war, or often prisoners of war who were turned over to the Europeans. And so what this means is, especially for the people who were born in Africa, you had people with all this military experience. If you've seen films like The Woman King, you had people who were very skilled fighters, but of course, while they were enslaved and while the French were focused on suppressing them, it was hard to rise up. Now, once the French are distracted now, and they're fighting between themselves, you had people who organized themselves and said, okay, let's organize to take things back. And in August 1791, the struggle for freedom was launched in the north of Haiti and soon broke out across the whole colony, the western part of Hispaniola, what we now call Haiti. And in 1794, the French finally recognized it and declared that slavery was abolished. Now, there's a lot more history that I'm leaving out, right? But that kind of gives you an introduction to how this happened and why it was then.
That's a really, really fascinating and important bit of information as to how this got started and the circumstances in which the revolution started. But I wanted to zoom in on one particular character from the revolution, which is, and I hope I'm pronouncing this right, Toussaint Louverture, who was considered the leader of the Haitian Revolution. He's a really fascinating character. There's a lot of twists and turns with him and another character. I think his name is Dessalines. I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right as well. But these are very important men who are sort of the reason why this revolution was such a success. Can we talk about them? Because they really are interesting, and I think most people should know about them.
And I definitely want to talk about Toussaint Louverture Dessalines, but I want to back up a little because sometimes we talk about great men in history and women were involved too. So actually, when the revolution was launched in August 1791, it was a man and a woman, both. It was a man whose name was Boukman and a woman named Cécile Fatima. And they had the ceremony, which was a voodoo ceremony, the Haitian religion that's often caricatured and distorted and called voodoo. But their people took strength from the voodoo spirits, gods, and said, we are going to fight and we are going to abolish slavery and we're going to become free. So they began that struggle. And then as it continued, the leader of the revolution in a few years became Toussaint Louverture, who's the most famous leader of the Haitian Revolution. He's compared to George Washington or Napoleon, a man on a horse, a kind of revolutionary general. And he was a very, very good horse rider. That's a skill that he had even before the revolution. And he was very strategic and was good at trying to play the French and the Spanish, and then also the Americans, right? Because you had this new country to the north, which had just had a revolution after throwing off England. And he's still an icon today. Unfortunately, the French kidnapped him. And in 1802, he died in a cell in France. Hold on one second. I just want to make sure that I didn't say 1802 when it's 1803. Yeah, I knew it. Okay, so the French kidnapped him in 1802, and in 1803, he ended up dying in a prison cell in France. But the the Haitians were not going to let the revolution die with him. And there's a famous quote by Toussaint Louverture that says that even when the branches of a tree are killed, the roots are still deep and profound. And Haitians, it's the tree of liberty. I left that part out. The tree of liberty has roots that are deep and profound. And so Toussaint's subordinates, the other generals started to take over, and Dessalines becomes Jean-Jacques Dessalines, another person who had been enslaved, becomes the leader of the revolution. And they defeat the French, who were still trying desperately to hold on and keep slavery in Saint-Domingue in Haiti. And on January 1st, 1804, Dessalines proclaimed the independent nation of Haiti. And that was the beginning. Of course, there are a lot of things that happened afterwards, but I'll stop and let you ask a question so I don't keep going on about Haitian history.
Oh, no, it's a great segue into what happened afterwards, because I was going to ask you, what happens afterwards and the fallout of that and how it may be affecting events today, right now in Haiti. Haiti is in the news for all the wrong reasons. There's a crisis going on, and correct me if I'm wrong, there's kind of a through line that goes back into its history that might be the root cause of it. So can you talk about what happens after the revolution? These slaves free themselves. They start their own independent country, but ...
Yeah. So Black freedom, enslaved people who had liberated themselves, was a terrifying thing to enslavers all around the Atlantic. You still had slavery in Latin America, in Brazil, right? In nearby islands in Cuba, and certainly in the southern United States and in Jamaica. So you had all of these powers, Spain, Portugal, Britain, the United States, on top of France, who do not want this example to succeed. And so there was a kind of icing Haiti out. Under Thomas Jefferson, there was a blockade of Haiti. No one would recognize the country as an independent country. They viewed it as a nation of outlaws who'd stolen French property, meaning themselves and the land. And they were not recognized by other countries until France in 1825 agrees finally to recognize Haiti, but on one condition, that the enslaved people will reimburse France for the property that they stole, which is ridiculous because when you think about something like the Holocaust, after it was over, Germany had to reimburse survivors for the trauma that they had suffered. I mean, it was piddling reimbursement when you think about the fact all that they had gone through, but it wasn't the idea that they had to pay the Nazis back. And yet here you have the enslaved people who'd suffered so much and been tortured now have to pay 150 million francs to the French. And so this was the condition, though, that the French set. And afterwards, Haiti had this debt that was very large, and each year they had to pay this amount to the French. Now, this was bad enough, but as the 19th century went on, Haiti was a more thriving country later in the 19th century, but the US still had designs on it and thought this is a place so close to us and we could control it and it would be useful for a lot of different things. So again, shortened because all of these things are longer. In 1915, the United States invaded Haiti and controlled it until 1934. And Haitians were forced to grow sugar and do other things for the Haitian American Sugar Company, so that Americans and others could have sugar to put in cakes or their drinks. Again, this is in the 20th century, and there's still this hint always in Haiti. I mean, it's not even a hint. If the United States doesn't like the leader of Haiti, they will be put in a limo. There will be a revolution against that person and they will be gone. So whoever is the leader in Haiti is essentially chosen by the United States at this point. There's a fiction that Haitians have sovereignty. And for the last several years, especially since the earthquake, there's been a government in Haiti that people do not like, that has not been helping people, but the US has somehow blessed them and decided that they should be in charge. And so even now, 2023, Haitians still are pushing this government does not have legitimacy. It stays in power with the help of gangs. And average Haitians want to get them out of there, but the US keeps backing them and supporting them. So that's very difficult. So that's the short answer. I will say, Meg, that I have another book called Haitian History, New Perspectives that goes into detail in one book, all of Haitian history from before Columbus to the present. And so I'm able to go into some more details, but foreign interference in Haiti definitely is one of the reasons that, yeah, Haiti is in trouble now.
You know, it's really eye-opening because you don't hear about that on the news in the US. And I was wondering, like, what is it about Haiti that no one wants to interfere or help? And that explanation goes a long way.
Except they are interfering. That's the problem.
Or rather, not helping the Haitian people get rid of this government they don't like, right? Like it's the opposite. They're helping, but not in the way they should.
Exactly, right. And the help is harmful. For instance, Bill Clinton, when he was president, decided to help out some rice farmers in Arkansas, buy several $1 million worth of rice from farmers. The farmers were very happy. Let's send it as food aid to Haiti. Well, that was very nice for the Arkansas rice farmers, but what it did was it basically bankrupted Haitian rice producers. All the farmers there, you can't sell your rice when people are for a short time being given free rice. So no one is buying their crops. This stuff is coming from Arkansas and it puts people out of business. And of course, the shipments of rice didn't continue, but it's also been part of a plan to kind of turn Haitians from people who are self-sufficient, can grow their own food and supply it, to people who have to go labor in sweatshops. It's a lot cheaper to bring clothes from Haiti to the United States than from China. The transportation costs are smaller. So yeah, it's very bad. And when Haitians have organized to try to raise the minimum wage, which is disgustingly low, a few dollars a day, when they've tried to raise it a few more dollars a day, then the US State Department generally lobbies against it because this is bad for American business.
Well, that's perfectly horrifying.
Yeah,
very
truly.
important to know.
All of this is horrifying when we pay attention to it.
Yeah, so I'm glad that you're here because this is an education for me, and I'm sure for a lot of the audience to understand what's really going on. It's actually a good segue into why the Haitian Revolution in Haiti isn't much portrayed in Hollywood and video games. And as you say in your book about slave revolt and the Haitian Revolution film and video games, it's almost radioactive to Hollywood. So let's talk about the why of that. Or although already you start to get a sense of, yeah, maybe we're a little ashamed of this history, or is it something else?
It's part of that. Part of it has to do with the fact that the Haitian Revolution wasn't taught for a long time. When you think about the historical profession was mostly white men. People of color and until more recently, women were not professors at universities. Even now, when you think of a professor, you think of an old dude. That's like what we imagine, right. Which is why on Twitter, sometimes you have hashtags, this is what a professor looks like, when young, fashionable women and others show, okay, that's not only what a professor is, but given those structures, people were not paying attention. They were kind of sweeping away these professors, this history. So you've got that. It's part of the general kind of silencing of the Haitian Revolution, which the late Haitian anthropologist Michel Rolfe-Trouillot wrote about in a very fascinating book called Silencing the Past, Power and the Production of History. It's about the Haitian Revolution, but it's become one of the most, I don't know that trendy is the word, but like if you look, on social media, it's become an even more popular book. Just yesterday, I saw someone tweeting, what book do you learn more each time you read it or you need to reread? And someone said, Silencing the Past. And someone else said, me too. So of course I chimed in also, and I agreed. But you've got this general silencing, but then let's add Hollywood and the particular institutional dynamics of Hollywood. And Hollywood is also an industry that is primarily run by white men. There are documentaries that show how hard it is for white women directors. And increasingly, of course, there are people of color who are able to make films and tell their story. But the problem is they still have to go before largely white male gatekeepers who decide whether a film is interesting enough and will have an audience. And there's been this idea that films on Black history are okay and will get an audience if there's a white hero that the audience can identify with. Because just like when I was talking about, the minimum wage in Haiti, it's so bleak and horrible to think about. And there's this idea that audiences won't want to see films about slavery that are bleak, like the real history of slavery was, if there's not something uplifting and a white hero in whose eyes the audience, which is also imagined as white, will be able to see themselves. And so you have a long history of films about Black history, Mississippi Burning, Amistad, 12 Years a Slave, in which you get to tell these stories only when there's a white person who saves the day. So a story like the Haitian Revolution, in which there is not a white hero, this is about enslaved people freeing themselves, has been something that seems to have scared producers. And Danny Glover, who many people know more as an actor, was trying to make a film about Toussaint Louverture. And when he went to producers, they said, yeah, great. Where's the white hero? And they wouldn't fund it because there wasn't one.
Wow. Well, it sounds like we missed out on a heck of a awesome film. But video games there's not much there either, but they seem to have done a little bit better. And there are two games that we mentioned earlier. One is Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, which started off as downloadable content for a game called Assassin's Creed Black Flag. I'm sure a lot of my audience knows or has played that game. And there's a lesser known game, I think, to a younger audience, but there was a game in the 1980s that came out that was really important as well, called Freedom Rebels in the Darkness. And until your book, I actually didn't know about it. It had passed me by. I was a little girl at the time, but I was already a gamer. And so I think this game came out close to Super Mario Brothers 2 or something. But it is a very sort of raw, honest look about being a slave. So before we get to Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, because a lot of people know about that, I wanted to talk about Freedom Rebels in the Darkness, because this is in and of itself a game very much ahead of its time in a lot of ways.
Definitely. So let me say first that I also discovered it after I knew about Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. For me, first, as someone who's not a gamer now, it was really surprising to learn about Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry to begin with, because and this is something that I talk about at the end of my book in my acknowledgements, I was actually among the early online gamers. My father was a scientist, and so in the late 1970s, he brought home this little terminal that printed out things, and we could call up to his lab and play things like Hangman or Pong on this terminal that printed out on paper. And this was before anyone that I knew had home computers or there was gaming. And in the 80s also, I kept up. My father would get us consoles. And so I gamed, but I stopped once I got to college in the late 1980s. And I really was not keeping up on how complex games had become. So when a student told me that Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry was coming out and was about slavery in colonial Saint-Domingue, it kind of blew my mind. And I'll talk more then afterwards about what I thought about this game. But once I started to work on it, to compare the fact that the Haitian Revolution has been more or less silenced in Hollywood, with a few exceptions. But then there's this blockbuster DLC coming out from Ubisoft and the Assassin's Creed series. That blew my mind. And then a friend told me they shared a blog article that they'd found about Phil Salvador, who is a really wonderful games librarian and preservationist, that he was writing about the fact that this game had been made, it was possible to play it by emulation online, and that the code and the files were on archive.org. That also blew my mind. And what was even more incredible for me was to realize not only was this game made not by white developers coming late to the story, but by descendants of enslaved people in the French Caribbean, but one of my favorite novelists was one of the co-authors. Patrick Chamoiseau is one of my favorite authors. He's written books. He's very witty, but he's writing books about the memory of slavery in Martinique, which is it's still part of France, like Hawaii is part of the United States. It's an overseas department. But the kind of the memory of slavery there. And I just couldn't believe that they had made this game. So it's really incredible. And it was a hit at the time because it was very innovative in not being like, Super Mario Brothers, but in telling a really important historical story and in centering resistance by enslaved men and women, because there are women avatars in that game too.
Yeah, I was really pleasantly surprised by that, because again, this is in the 1980s. So it is not made by white people. There's a female protagonist as an option.
Yeah.
And this game is so fascinating. It's kind of a mix of different genres. There's like an adventure, a role-playing element, even a fighting game element, and you get to pick these different slaves with different specialties, but it's not like exactly the same thing as Assassin's Creed, where you sneak around, but then you get into fights with people. It's all about stealth and not getting caught, and the consequences.
It's a good way to put it. Yeah.
So,
and Muriel Tramy, who made this game, Elijah Lee, after I wrote my book, he identified her as the first Black woman game designer. And so she was really pioneering at that time. She told me in interviews, even the idea of being a game designer, this was like a new role to kind of come up with these ideas. And so the game was very technologically advanced for the time, but it's absolutely more historically accurate just like the things that I said about resistance in Haiti before 1789 and before 1791, it had to be more stealth, because if you were discovered, then the punishments were really horrifying.
Yes, I think in the game you're trying to go around and burn down the plantations. You can do some lock picking, and you have it's either like a walk or a jump ability. But if you're caught, you'll have dogs set on you. And like I said earlier, if you're caught, you face a horrifying punishment of having lead poured in wounds and all sorts of horrible stuff. And it's like a white knuckle, very gripping adventure game that's very raw. And so I feel it's very different than Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry. Do you feel the same way?
Absolutely, because again, and I'm not a very good gamer, I have to say, I need help sometimes to advance. My son's in high school and he loves gaming, and he also is very inspiring for me. When you fail to complete a mission in Assassin's Creed, it's like game over, it's very low stakes, right? Game over, like darn it, oops. But in Freedom Rebels in the Darkness, it's much more historically accurate to what happens if you're trying to resist and it doesn't work. And the fact that the dogs are in the game is like very raw and very real, because this was something that was very terrifying to enslaved people. The same way that in the 1960s, Bull Connor and other racists in the South sick dogs on people who were protesting for their civil rights. Yeah, the dogs were always trying to hunt enslaved people who might resist or get out of line.
Right. How do you feel about these two games and how the historical accuracy of them? It definitely seems like Freedom is the more historically accurate game, but how do you feel about, so just to give people who haven't played Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry, basically you play this character who was in Assassin's Creed Black Flag, Adewale. He gets sort of marooned on the island of Haiti and ends up helping try to have the slaves free themselves. But it takes a sort of different, I mean, if you played Assassin's Creed, it's this mix of history, yes, but fiction and even sci-fi. So when you were researching for your book, how did you find the accuracy of Assassin's Creed Freedom Cry? Was it too much, too little? Were there good parts, bad parts?
Yeah, so first, as a historian who works on pop culture like film and games, I should say, how do I think about accuracy? And I absolutely do not want to be in the camp of historians who look at a film or a video game and say, wrong, 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 wrong. This game is terrible. Because obviously, for something to be a compelling story, right? Just the same as when I was talking with you. For me to really get in the weeds, it might take me 60 hours, and no one wants to listen to me give that detail. So I have to simplify things and shorten them. And so in a game, of course, right, you want it to be a compelling story. And so just like filmmakers, video game designers make choices. They create composite characters like Adewale. Okay, Adewale wasn't a real person, okay? The people in the game weren't a real person. So you've got all of these things that are fictionalized along with things that are accurate. And for me as a historian, I take inspiration from a historian of film named Robert Rosenstone, who worked in Hollywood as a consultant, and his ideas were very influential and persuasive to me. He said that what's really important is whether a film can bring things alive and help audiences understand historical processes better than a text, but not on what he says, a just the facts, ma'am, kind of approach. That's a really simplistic way, because if you do that, every film and every video game is not going to be accurate. They're all going to have errors. So with that in mind, yeah, there are things in Assassin's Creed that are not accurate. We've already been talking about the fact that resistance was a lot harder and that the stakes for failing were terrible. So that is underplayed in the game. Also, it's set in the 1730s, and there was a lot more active resistance happening in the 1750s. On the other hand, when you consider what I've said about how this whole story of slave revolt in Haiti has been radioactive to film funders, and it's not been mentioned in books. Here's this major franchise setting a game in Haiti, and you're tasked with being Adewale and trying to help free enslaved people and kill enslavers. So I think that's pretty radical. And I think that it helps restore this topic to people's memory. It also shows, which I think is really important, there was resistance in Haiti before 1789. You had Maroons, you had people trying to organize, even if it didn't look exactly the way it does in the game. So even if I think Freedom, Rebels in the Darkness is more accurate, I still am very impressed. And I want to give a shout out to Jill Murray, who was the executive at Ubisoft, the writer rather than executive, who was the lead writer for the game and talked to a lot of Haitians in Montreal, where she's based, and read a lot of scholarship and really did a serious job in conjunction with Jean-Pierre Le Glonec, who is the historian who was hired as the consultant for the game.
So let me ask you this. What film or video game would you like to see? Like, what would be a good way to tackle the topic in the future? What is an ideal way to...
I still think that there could be a big biopic of Toussaint Louverture. I talk in the book about the French one and how bad it was, but right. I also was able to find out some of the backstory and how the original director of the project, Raoul Peck, who's an amazing Haitian director who works in France and in the US, he was supposed to do the project, and the studio separated from him and they doctored his script. So I think his original script would still be amazing. It's an amazing story, right? About people freeing themselves and organizing in the face of all of this resistance. And I think that would still be great. But I also think there are a lot of really amazing games that people are making that have to do with memory. So we talked about Freedom, Rebels in the Darkness by Muriel Tkami and Patrick Chamoiseau. They made another game called Mawillo that was set in the period of the early 20th century that looked at the legacy of slavery and how it was still haunting the island. And there are games now that historians are starting to make that look at things in creative ways too. So one of the articles that I have written right now and I've submitted, I'm waiting to see if it gets through peer review, is about a game called Blackhaven. And Blackhaven was created by a historian, James Coltrane, at the University of Connecticut, in conjunction with scholars and students at Xavier University in New Orleans of Louisiana, which is a historically Black university, looking at what happens when a Black HBCU student gets an internship at a plantation museum in the South and discovers how it whitewashes slavery and the difference between what the exhibits say about slavery and what she finds in the back in the archives. So I think there are all kinds of creative things that people could do in films or games. But I'll say I go into more detail in this question also in the epilogue in my book, thinking about what would a good film or video game look like.
Right. Where can people find your work, by the way? This is a good time to sort of let people know, where can they find your different works on Haiti?
Sure. So I've written 3 books. The first was called The Abbé Grégoire in the French Revolution. It's a biography of a French priest who was involved in the French Revolution and also was seen as Haiti's best friend at the time. That's available from the University of California Press and paperback. Of course, you can also get these all on Amazon or other booksellers. My second book, Haitian History, New Perspectives, was from Routledge. That is available on Amazon too. That has become the most expensive of my books. So it's good to get it on sale or used. And then Slave Revolt on Screen, the Haitian Revolution in Film and Video Games, is from the University Press of Mississippi. It is $30 in paperback, but sometimes you can get that on sale also. And yeah, I'm happy when gamers and non-historians read it. It's been getting assigned in classes, and it's now 2023. The book came out in 2021, and there's still sustained interest. I would have thought, but it's taking some people a little time to find out about it. So I have more talks planned on it this fall also. The other thing I'll interrupt you is that I do have things in open access also, shorter things. So if people Google my name, I have an academia.edu page where I try to put things in open access. And I've also been doing blog pieces. So my latest thing that's going to be coming out is about the Haitian Revolution in hip hop. For hip hop, the 50th anniversary, Black Perspectives, which is the blog of the African American Intellectual History Society, is doing a series on hip hop at 50. So I have a piece that should come out next week, or maybe already by the time the podcast airs, that's called Unsilencing the Haitian Revolution in U.S. Hip Hop. And I look at rappers who've shouted out the Haitian Revolution to try to talk, again, more about uncovering this history and looking to Haitian revolutionaries, Toussaint or Dessalines, as examples.
Well, thank you so much for coming on History and Games. I really appreciate your time. This was a super important subject. It's a fascinating topic, and I just wish I'd learned about it sooner, but thanks to your work and thanks to people shouting you out on Twitter and being like, you should have her on your show. She's really great. I'm like, I have got to thank them for pointing me in your direction. Your work is really informative, really entertaining, and really important.
Let me just give a shout out, though. I want to shout out also other scholars who've done really pioneering work on race and games. And so I just want to give a shout out also to Kashana Gray, who also works on race and games, because I'm not working in this field by myself, and I've learned a lot from people like her and from Evan Narcisse.
All right. I'm really glad that you gave them a shout out. It's so nice when everyone supports each other.
I also just want to thank the audience. It's really great that people want to know more about the history behind the games that they're playing. And I know that there's a hunger for better history content in games. And it's long past time that historians start paying attention and that we start engaging with games to try to help better games be created.
Yeah. And so thank you to you and all the scholars who are trying to bring more attention to the Haitian Revolution, other parts of history that have been whitewashed or just simply erased. So thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, Meg.